أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. In our last lesson regarding building an Islamic household, we mentioned other traditions, new traditions that presented certain styles used by Ahlul Bait alayhim as-salatu was-salam to enjoin good and forbid evil. And the reason we presented several narrations on this regard is, number one, to learn from Ahlul Bait alayhim as-salatu was-salam the different styles, to learn the different styles we could use when we enjoin good and forbid evil, and also to confirm that when you want to enjoin good or forbid evil, you have a good amount of styles that you can choose. You have a good amount of styles that you could choose from as you are enjoining good or forbidding evil, as you are reminding that individual or those individuals and groups of their duty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we mentioned, if you remember, how Al-Hasan wal-Husayn, salawatullahi alayhima, they taught an old man how to perform wudu and notified him that his wudu was incorrect by doing what? By pretending that they're in a dispute, that they're disputing, right? And then they made him the judge, telling him to judge between them and to see which one of them was performing wudu correctly. By the end of their wudu, the old man understood the message. He understood that both were right and he was wrong. Both were doing wudu correctly, whereas his wudu was incorrect, and he thanked Al-Hasan wal-Husayn alayhim as-salam for that notification. What brought us to this topic? What brought us is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Tahrim, when He says, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا, save yourselves and your families from a fire, whose fuel is what? نَارًا وَقُودُهَا النَّاسِ وَالْحِجَارَةِ, whose fuel are humans and stones. So Allah tells us that we're responsible of what? Of saving our families as well from Jahannam. I cannot only think about myself. Firstly, I think about myself, yes. I think about my religion, my piety, but I also have to think about the faith and the piety of my families. I have to enjoin good and forbid evil. If I see them deviating, I need to speak to them. I need to have discussions with them. If I don't see them deviating, they're worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they're faithful, I still have to be involved in their lives and have to uphold my duty to ensure that they're following, or they will continue to follow, the path of Ahlul Bait alayhim as-salatu was-salam. So parents hold a huge responsibility in regards to properly raising their children, and at the same time paying close attention to the faith, morals, and practices of their children. That being said, today inshallah we're going to mention another step, step 2 or 3, that we need to take to uphold or establish an Islamic family, and that is getting married, right? It's a very obvious step. Without getting married, then you will not be able to establish that Islamic household we are talking about. So we've understood until now that the believing man and the believing lady, both of them, should work on themselves. After marriage, yes, but also before marriage. Both of them should learn their religion, learn their beliefs, their practices, their Islamic laws, Islamic morals, etc. They should work on themselves, work on self purifying, and after that, obviously, they should also get married. Now, the process of self purification is a long process. It's a process that has a beginning, but it does not end up until a person passes away. And so when we say that the believing man or the believing lady should work on himself or herself and then get married, we're not saying that once the process of self purification finishes, you get married. That's not what we're saying. Because as we said, that process does not finish, it continues. You continue to self purify, you continue to work on yourself even after marriage up until you pass away. But the main point that we're focusing on is that even prior to marriage, a mu'min or a mu'mina should be learning his or her religion, should be working on his or her self, etc. So marriage is the second or the third step that we mention in these lessons. The narrations of Ahlul Bait alayhim salatu wassalam have emphasized a lot on the importance of marriage. We have a lot of traditions, oceans of narrations that speak about marriage, and we realize that when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to humanity, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa wasallam performed three deeds. In regards to what? In regards to marriage and or relationships between men and women. Number one, he forbade fornication and its prerequisites. He forbade zina waliyadu billah and the actions which lead to zina. That's number one. Number two, he emphasized on the importance of what? Of getting married. And number three, he simplified marriage. He made it simple, made it easy. Why? Because when marriage is simple, when it's easy to get married, then people are closer to adhering to what's lawful and they're more distant of falling into what is forbidden. So they're more distant from what? From fornication, adultery, and their prerequisites. And at the same time, they're closer to what? To adhering only to lawful relationships. Jayid. So he simplified marriage. Ahlul Bait alayhim salam greatly stressed on marriage to the point our fuqaha, our jurists say, marriage is highly recommended. So it's mustahab. Not only mustahab, it's mustahab mu'akkad. It's recommended and it's highly emphasized upon. In fact, the jurists say that this is the primary hukum, the primary law regarding marriage. But there's a secondary law, which is what? Wujub. In some cases, marriage is mandatory. It's not only mustahab. How does it become mandatory? It becomes mandatory when refraining from marriage will lead a person to an unlawful deed. In fact, it becomes mandatory when the person fears of falling into a forbidden deed because he's not married, which is the case for most human beings. At the end of the day, most of us are what? Fallible. Right now we have two infallibles on earth, صاحب الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجه and Al-Khidr عليه السلام. But the rest of us are what? Fallible human beings, right? We're not Isa ibn Maryam عليهم السلام. We're not Yahya ibn Zakaria عليهم السلام. We have weaknesses, we have emotions, we have hormones, etc. In most cases, a person will fear falling into a forbidden deed if he does not get married. And so, a Muslim or Muslima should not refrain from marriage, should not tell himself or herself that, you know what, marriage is not for me. No. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa wants us all to get married. This is something that we should speak about and that should be emphasized upon in this era for multiple reasons. Number one, because unfortunately, in some societies at least, marriage in this era has become complicated, has become somewhat difficult. So, if it has become somewhat difficult or somewhat complicated, should I, the Muslim, or I, the mu'min, refrain from marriage? Should I tell myself, khalas, I don't want it anymore? No. I should still strive for marriage. Because the other option is what? The other option is falling into unlawful deeds. And falling into unlawful deeds is not really an option. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want us to perform unlawful deeds, does not want us to fall into fornication or any deed which leads to it. Number two, a second reason why we should talk about marriage and what Ahlul Bait said about marriage and how we should get married is that unfortunately in secular societies, marriage is somewhat belittled. In better terms, in secular societies, you don't find too many people who are encouraged to get married. If they get married, in some cases, they get married when they're quite old, in their, late 30s or 40s. Is that what we want for Muslims? Is that what we want for mu'mineen? No, we don't want that. We don't want that. Someone with a secular mentality does not mind falling into countless unlawful deeds as he refrains from marriage. But for us, that's not the case. For us, we're told by Allah, Rasulullah, and Ahlul Bait, alayhim salatu wassalam, you're not allowed to perform fornication or to do the deeds which lead to it. You're not allowed to date, for example, a non-mahram. You're not allowed to be in seclusion, complete seclusion with a non-mahram. There are many boundaries that we need to respect and that we cannot cross. Marriage will help us. It's a mu'in. It's a helper in what? In refraining from crossing these boundaries or say crossing these limits. So even if secular societies belittle marriage or don't consider it too important, or they tell you, yes, you can or should get married, but that should not be done at an early age, we, Muslimin, and we, mu'mineen, should not have the same mindset, should not hold the same ideas. Because we have, you know, we have Ahlul Bait alayhim salatu wassalam, and we have Al-Quran al-Kareem telling us that no, getting married at an early age is good. You should not delay marriage until you are, old, or you're in your late 30s, etc. And at the same time, there are boundaries that you, O mu'mineen and O Muslimin, should not cross and cannot cross. Marriage will help you in not crossing these boundaries. Hence, today, inshallah, we're going to look at certain narrations that speak about this, that speak about the importance of marriage. Again, reminding ourselves of these narrations is quite important, especially in our current era. The first one is a narration found in Al-Kafi, a narration that I believe many Muslimin have heard or even said. Many have heard or even uttered. The narration goes back to Kulayb bin Muawiyah al-Asadi. He says, عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. Imam Sadiq said that the Messenger of Allah said, من تزوج أحرز نصف دينه. He who gets married will have shielded or protected half of his faith. This is a known tradition. Then he says, وفي حديث آخر. There's another narration where the narration has an additional part. The narration is completed. The Prophet says, فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ فِي النِّصْفِ الْآخَرِ أَوِ الْبَاقِي. He says, so let him fear Allah in regards to the second half or to the remaining half. Here, the narration is making multiple points. Number one, it's telling us that marriage protects the faith of a Muslim, the faith of a believer. It protects it to a certain extent. As we mentioned in the introduction, it helps a person avoid unlawful relationships with the opposite gender. But it also helps the person from other perspectives. For example, if you look at, if you look at statistics regarding suicide, at least in Canada, you'll realize that those who are married are more distant from suicide. They're more distant from what? From committing suicide. Whereas someone who's single, in many cases, is closer to committing suicide, which makes sense if you think about it. Why? Because when you have a family, when you have a wife or a husband, and then you have children, if God forbid, God forbid, God forbid, the thought of suicide comes to your mind, and you have a family, the presence of that family will play a role in stopping you from committing suicide. Because you'll think, all right, if I kill myself, I am detaching myself from my family, but my spouse needs me, and my children also need me. So here, you start knocking, sense into your own mind. How can I commit suicide? By killing myself, I'm not only harming myself, I'm not only ending my life, I'm also harming my kids and my spouse. That thought could pull the person away from actually committing suicide. On the other hand, when a person is single, right, he does not have the responsibilities of a spouse, let alone having the responsibilities of a parent. He's single or she's single, then it's easier for that person to commit suicide because he or she does not hold those responsibilities. So what I'm trying to say is, obviously, suicide is completely haram. It's a major sin. It's it's one of the worst sins a person may commit, and it leads a person to dwelling in hellfire for eternity, as Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam says. It is not an option. No matter how miserable a person's life may be, no matter what kind of problems he may be going through, he should not commit suicide. He should not give in to the request or the demand of a shaitan, the devil, la'natullah alayh, and should not lose hope. Because as miserable as his life may be, as bad as his circumstances may be, there's always hope. Hope in what? Hope in who? Hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and Allah Azza wa Jal is able to change our circumstances in a split second. All he has to do is say kun, be, and the circumstances will be changed. The God who, saved Ibrahim alayhi salam from the fire of Nimrod and made it cold and peaceful to Ibrahim alayhi salam, or cold and peaceful on Ibrahim alayhi salam, that God who saved Ibrahim salamullahi alayh from the fire of Nimrod, when Ibrahim was this close of being burned by the fire of Nimrod, is able to change our circumstances whenever he wishes to do so. So, suicide is not an option at any time. A person should not commit it. But what I'm saying is, if a person is married, right, then he is farther away, he's more distant from actually committing suicide because of these attachments which exist in his life now. Because he has spousal responsibilities, he has parental responsibilities, etc. So we realize, if we look into marriage, that it doesn't only protect a person from falling into adultery or fornication, it also protects a person's faith from other perspectives. Let me give you a third perspective. Right now we mentioned how it protects a person from suicide and how it protects a person from adultery, fornication, and their prerequisites. But it also plays role in protecting a person from sins in general. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying marriage makes you infallible. That's not the case, right? But it does play a role in pushing a person away or pulling him away from sins. Why? Because when you get married, you have less time to waste. You're preoccupied. You have things to do. You have responsibilities. You're a spouse. Hence, you have what? Responsibilities towards your other spouse. You have obligations that you need to uphold. Later on, you become a parent, and now your responsibilities or obligations amplify. They are amplified or multiplied. Is that good? Yes, it's good. Because when you have a lot of time on your, a lot of time in your schedule, a lot of spare time, a lot of time on your plate, as they say, you're closer to using that time in an unlawful manner. Let's just say that. You're closer to, wasting your time by doing what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ahadith of Ahlul Bait alayhim salam actually confirm this. So when you're getting married and then you become a parent, you're becoming more busy, and that's actually good because it draws you away from committing certain types of sins or sins in general. But again, marriage does not make you infallible. Hence, the Prophet says what? He says, فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ فِي النَّصْفِ الْآخَرِ. Let him fear Allah in regards to the other half of his religion. So is it possible for someone who's married to still fall into certain sins, still fall into, sins pertaining to unlawful relationships? Yes, it's still possible. It is possible. There have been cases where someone was married and, God forbid, fell into adultery or fornication. It's still possible. Hence, what do we need? We need taqwa. We need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have piety, and to keep that state of piety alive within ourselves. In fact, we need to strengthen it. The more we strengthen our piety, the more we cause it to grow, the better it will be for us. This is one narration about marriage, and it's a golden narration, to be honest. A second one, also found in Al-Kafi, reminds us that when a person gets married, his marriage might be the cause of bringing a person, a faithful person, a God-fearing person in this world, a person who's a devoted slave of God subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you never know, that devoted slave of God might turn out to be a great marja in the future, or a shaheed, a martyr, or, an influential human being who's able to guide hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of people through the guidance of Ahlul Bait alayhim as-salam. And that in itself is a huge blessing. The tradition says, also in Al-Kafi, عن عبد الله ibn Sinan عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام قال لما لقي يوسف عليه السلام أخاه قال يا أخي كيف استطعت أن تزوج النساء بعدي. Imam al-Sadiq mentions a dialogue that happened between Yusuf and his brother عليهما السلام, Benjamin. Yusuf was separated from his family for a long time. And finally, he was reunited with his brothers before being reunited with his father and mother, alayhim as-salam. But his brothers did not recognize him. He recognized them, they did not recognize him. Nonetheless, he introduced himself to Benjamin at a certain point. He told him that I am Yusuf, alayhim as-salam, and he kept Benjamin with him. He did not, allow him to go back to Palestine. He wanted to, bring the whole family to Egypt. Nonetheless, he tells Benjamin, my brother, how were you able to marry women after me? What does that mean? It means he's telling him, how were you able to actually get married when I was absent? It's as if he's telling him, weren't you grieving over my absence, Ya Benyamin? When someone is grieving, when someone is in a state of depression, he doesn't feel like rejoicing, right? He doesn't feel like doing deeds that, make him happy. He doesn't feel like getting married at least in certain cases. So Yusuf alayhi salam was asking him this question, يا أخي كيف استطعت أن تزوج النساء بعدي? How were you able to get married to women after me, as in after I was absent, during my absence? فقال إن أبي أمرني. He told them that I got married because my father commanded me to get married. So it's as if he's saying, yes, we were in a state of sadness. We were grieving over your absence, Ya Yusuf. But my father told me that we still have to perform this beautiful practice. قال إن استطعت أن تكون لك ذرية تثقل الأرض بالتسبيح فافعل. Excuse me. He told me, Benjamin, if you're able to have a progeny that will make the earth heavy with its tasbih, then have that progeny. And it's quite obvious, to have an offspring, to have a progeny, you need what? You need a spouse. You need to get married. So Yaqub was encouraging Benjamin alayhim salam, to get married, at least for the sake of what? Having a child or multiple children who are faithful. And due to their faith, they perform tasbih. Now the tradition says, تثقل الأرض بالتسبيح. تثقل الأرض بالتسبيح. That progeny makes the earth heavy with its tasbih. Why does it say this? Because the tasbih of a believer, tasbih in itself, is a beautiful deed. It's a fabulous deed. And good deeds are heavy. Whereas bad deeds are what? Light. They're light. Hence, we want our mizan, our scale on the Day of Judgment, to be what? To be heavy, not to be a light scale. As in, we want it to be filled with good deeds, because each good deed has its own heaviness. And the traditions say what? The traditions say, this is just a side note, that the heaviest deed a person places in al-mizan is as-salat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad salawatullah alayhim ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. So from this perspective at least, Yaqub says, تثقل الأرض بالتسبيح. They make the earth heavy with their tasbih, because tasbih is a good deed, which means what? It has its own heaviness, thus it is a heavy deed. The narration here tells us that it is not wrong to get married for the sake of having a believing child, whether that child is a male or a female. On the contrary, it's good to have that intention, that I want to get married, to have a child who is devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who is a follower of Ahlul Bait alayhim as-salatu was-salam. That child is a form of sadaqah jariyah after a person's death. In what sense? What does that mean? When a person passes away, if he has a believing child that he left in this world, that he left on earth, the person who passed away, the mom or dad who passed away, will benefit as he or she is in his or her grave from the actions of that believing child. The least we can say is that they'll benefit from that child when he does what? When he sends them gifts to the hereafter. And when he does istighfar, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them. In fact, traditions indicate that the good he does, the good deeds he performs, those themselves benefit the parents in their graves. This is a second tradition. I will conclude the class. I had about 3 other traditions, but our time is almost up. Let me mention this one, and we'll call it a night, as they say. Ya Rab. This one is also in Al-Kafi. The narration goes back to Ibn Faddal. Actually, it goes back to Ibn al-Qaddah, Ibn al-Qaddah. عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام قال جاء رجل إلى أبي عبد الله عليه السلام. Ibn al-Qaddah says what? He says a man came to Imam al-Sadiq salawatullah wasalam alayhi. فقال له هل لك من زوجة? And so the Imam asked that man, do you have a wife? Realize, the Imam himself is asking that man, do you have a wife? فقال لا. He said no. فقال أبي وما أحب. Sorry, one second. فقال أبي وما أحب أن لي الدنيا وما فيها وإني or أني بت ليلة وليست لي زوجة. Here Imam al-Baqir made a comment. It seems both Imams were present. When the man arrived, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam asked him, do you have a wife? He said no. So Imam al-Baqir commented, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. What did he say? He said a very interesting comment. وما أحب أن لي الدنيا وما فيها وإني بت ليلة وليست لي زوجة. Imam basically says that I will not favor having the world and everything that lies in it over what? Over spending a night by myself without having a wife. Imagine the world and everything in it. There are a lot of riches, a lot of resources, a lot of blessings in this world, a lot of minerals, precious stones. The Imam says, if you gave me the whole world in exchange of what? In exchange of being by myself and not having a wife for just one night, I would not accept that offer. Which means that the presence of a wife, the presence of a Muslima, a mu'mina, a believing wife in the life of the believer is something great, is a great presence. It's a huge blessing. This is, by the way, a tradition which reveals once again the impeccable status that Islam assigns to believing women. ثم قال عليه السلام الركعتان يصليهما رجل متزوج أفضل من رجل أعزب يقوم ليلة ويصوم نهاره. He said 2 rak'ahs performed by a man who's married, by a married man, are better than the worship of a single man who stays up at night as he worships God and fasts the day. يقوم ليله ويصوم نهاره. So 2 rak'ahs performed by the married man are better than the worship performed by a single man when he stays up in worship at night and he fasts the day, or he fasts during daytime. Up until now, what have the Imams done? They've encouraged that individual and others as well to get married, right? These statements encourage the mu'mineen and the Muslimin to get married. But then look at what the Imam does, alayhi salam. ثم أعطاه أبي 7 دنانير. Imam al-Sadiq says, then my father gave him 7 golden coins, 7 dinars. ثم قال له تزوج بهذه. And he told him, get married using these dinars. So what is he doing? The Imam is supporting that individual. He's helping him in getting married. Not only do they emphasize verbally on marriage, they actually help the mu'mineen to get married, because that is a goal in itself. ثم قال أبي قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله اتخذوا الأهل فإنه أرزق لكم. Then my father said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said what? He said, get married. Because when you get married, you will amplify or increase your sustenance. So more sustenance will come to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you get married. Some people might think otherwise. If I don't get married, I, will have more money in my pocket or in my bank account. The Prophet says otherwise. He says if you get married, you will receive more sustenance. Bear in mind that the word rizq does not only refer to money. It refers to other issues as well. Health, knowledge, piety, faith, lands, all of those are forms of rizq. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله على المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين.